Greetings from Snake Mountain Boat Works on Sunday, February 18, 2018. Yes, we're looking at Susan, the 1940 16-foot Lyman Yacht Tender, post-bleaching, and we're not going to do another video update on the exterior components of her hull, but what I thought might be an interesting experiment is to go down under where I've been working for the last 2 weeks and see what happens if we try to do an update on the stripping and cleaning and sealing of the interior of the bilge and the topsides. So let's go down under and see what we find. So here we are inside the hull with the hull upside down. This is where I've spent my days for the last 2 weeks. When I began, the hull from this point, from this point to the keel, everything from here all the way to the keel, from the bow to the stern, was happily covered with 3 different layers of bilge paint, and it was blue against the wood, an absolutely stomach-turning Kelly green on top of that, and then finally somebody smartened up and bought a can of tan enamel. It wasn't a bilge paint, it was an enamel paint, but at least it was tan. And so I've spent 2 weeks stripping everything, including the bilge stringers, including the bilge, all the way over to the port side at the same point, from front to back, and this point to the keel. From there, they're down, but I guess actually they're up. The boat was varnished. So everything here was multiple layers of tired varnish that unfortunately was still adhering way too well. This boat suffered the assault of the varnish on a paintbrush, and every year we just put more varnish on. It might as well, and unfortunately all that varnish had to come off. My tools of choice were my 2 Amvic scrapers. This little triangular guy turned out to be incredibly useful in places like right up close in the seam to the between strakes. The real challenge, though, was trying to get in to these spaces and clean these. And I tried various chisels, tiny chisels, big chisels, but nothing was flexible enough to get in there. Well, we have a whole series of these steel cylindrical brushes, and they typically terminate in a nice loop at the end so that you can get a hold of them. Well, I wondered what would happen if I took a grinder, and this is really hard steel, so I took a grinder to cut it off, and that gave me a shaft that was pretty stiff but still flexible. And I stuffed that in an electric drill and went to every one of these points on the entire boat and simply ran the brush for about 10 seconds or so, maybe 5 seconds, in every one of these, all the way from the gunnels to the keel, and it was amazing what came out behind that. And so we now face a decision. I've been doing quite a bit of research, and it turns out that Lyman offered this model, and it was actually called a custom yacht tender because the buyer could could ask for almost and get almost anything. The typical layout was to varnish the inside of the hull from the gunwale all the way to the keel. It would all have been finished bright. Alternatively, the standard issue, the one without the options, would have painted everything with bilge paint all the way down. We've now stripped it all, and I'd love to finish it bright up to this point right here, where the bilge starts. There's a stop that runs lengthwise all the way along the boat, and then the cross pieces sit here, and the floor panels then sit against those cross pieces. So clearly from this point to the keel, we will bilge paint the surface. That's a no-brainer. The question is, what do we do from here down? I've seen, it's kind of like if you line up 5 economists, ask them all the same question, you get 8 answers, and none of those answers are even close to being in agreement with one another. The issue is that the boat is planked in cypress from the gunwale to this point, where it then switches to mahogany. So this is the visible part of the hull, and I am torn, because if I finish it all bright, I'm going to have quite a variation in color. But then, if you look right down along the gunwale, the cypress used for the first 2 strakes is the same color on the outside now that we've bleached it, but on the inside this is much darker than the next 3 are, and John, RJ, and I have been arguing like crazy. These 4 strakes that turn dark again on the outside really look like cypress. On the inside, it has all that characteristic speckled presentation that is so typical of mahogany. So it's really difficult, and I'm not good enough with wood species, identifying wood species, but my gut is telling me finish it bright from here, in other words, starting at the floor all the way up to the gunwale. Everything from there up is clearly mahogany, and it will be stained the classic Lyman mahogany stain. The dashboard will be treated the same way. The combings will, the transom will, and of course the foredeck and the aft deck. As you can see, it's still pretty light colored way up forward. That's because a guy who's 6'4" and 250 pounds and a space that small just are not friends. So unfortunately, RJ has inherited the luxury of having stripped all of that and then scraped it and then sanded it. He gets to apply the 3 coats of clear penetrating epoxy sealer and then varnish that down to the floor line as well. So at this point, we being me, have cleaned it all, sanded it endlessly. Festool offers a magical, very small sander, detail sander, smaller than the standard detail sander, that takes either a delta sheet or a circular sheet. That the circular sheet is about, I'd say, 2.5 inches in diameter. The delta sheet is about 3 inches long total, maybe 2 inches wide. Well, that allowed me to get in between all of the nooks and crannies. Let's see if we can go around here and get ourselves a little bit of light back at this end. And without that sander, I would have been lost. The transom's really rather interesting. It's 2 planks of mahogany with 2 wide boards, and is in just, as you can see, I really didn't have to do anything here other than sand it lightly because it had never been finished at all. There was nothing on it. It was just accumulated dirt and grime. Applying the CPES in this environment is pretty dangerous, to tell you the truth, because all those VOCs, which are extreme with CPES, are captured in this space. So I've been running a 20-inch floor fan, and I ran that along the floor, and that created a kind of a Venturi effect that sucked the fouled air out of this space. But I also have been wearing a really aggressive 3M chemical respirator so that I can protect myself. So what's next? I've only got 2 coats of CPES up to the, it's up to now because the boat's upside down, up to the floor. So later today I will apply the 3rd coat for the entire hull from the gunwale up, and once we let that cure, sometime this next week we will start varnishing it. I am tempted to use Sikkens Sea-Tall Marine. It's not a super high gloss, but it's a really tough varnish, and in this environment, if the surface gets scuffed with Sikkens, you have the opportunity to sand that spot and apply some additional material, and it blends in very nicely. But that's a decision for later. Right now, this completes our update on Sunday, February 18 for the 1940 Lyman 16-foot Custom Yacht Tender. Thank you so much. Bye-bye for now from Snake Mountain Boat Works.